And if there are any questions, anything you want to know about me or what I do, shoot. Be happy to tell you all about it.
And I really liked you mentioned that art is your teacher. Mm-hmm. Let the art be do the teaching and discover what lessons are to be learned from that. I know, they say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And how do we know when? How do we know when that teacher has appeared?
Usually ready.
In what form?
Sorry.
How do we know when the teacher has appeared? You will know it by the fruits that it bears. When someone new comes into your life, or when an idea occurs to you and it just changes you, when tingles flood through your body and you feel more alive, that is the guru. It can be a person, it can be a pop song that you hear on 93.3. It can be anything, a book that you read, a painting, a poem. When you see it and something moves in you, something shifts and something happens, then you know that the teacher has shown up. And what I mean by art is my teacher is the way that I learn from writing, the way that I learn from creating, the process of doing it and the results of it. I can go back and read poems that I wrote several months ago and be blown away. Like, I've forgotten things since then. In that moment that I wrote that, I was inspired and in tune in a way that I have since lost touch with, and I go back and read my own poem and I'm amazed. It's like somebody else did this. And I learned from something that I did. That's what I mean by art is my teacher. And other people as well, of course. I could list books that have changed my life. I can list songs that have transformed me as a person. I mean, my spiritual path began with like Shakespeare and William Butler Yeats and Jimi Hendrix. That's a good combination. Those were my first teachers. So, yeah. And I recently have been guided to actually take the leap of faith and leave behind hourly wage work for the moment and commit myself full time to writing, freelancing, following my passion. So I'm learning as I go when it comes to that. Art and spirituality, like I said, are a mutual phenomenon for me. And now bringing business into it is a whole nother animal and a whole nother dance, and that's a learning process in and of itself.
Oh, just sort of inspired by art is your teacher, and like everything is art around you. Even everything that we see. One of my favorite sayings I heard once is, "Everything we see has been created twice." First in the mind, and I recently reading this book about Steve Jobs, and he was talking about one of his designers, and something we've all experienced is how a keyboard can pivot on a wall, and that was actually inspired by, a monitor can pivot on a ball. That was actually inspired by a designer walking through a flower garden and seeing a sunflower. So I can, yeah, and you don't think about how these things come to be, but art is everywhere around us, and I can also relate to you how you can go back over your old work and revise things and grow from that.
And like you mentioned, it's created twice. You write a song, but then when I hear it, a whole another process goes on. You've created a song, and then I recreate it in my own mind, and the associations that it awakens in me, my memories, and my feelings that get stirred up by the song. It's not the same for any two people. Everyone approaches a piece of art and has their own unique experience with it, their own unique reaction. So art really has a life of its own.
Chris brings up an interesting point that I think that a lot of people that are artistic kind of run into, which is the importance of making sure that there's water in the well that you can draw from. So I'm curious, how do you refill that well? What inspires you? What helps you to come up with things to create and ideas and inspiration?
Okay. Meditation. To answer your question in one word, and meditation doesn't always mean sitting still and being quiet. Meditation is kind of an attitude and an approach to life. Sometimes a meditation for me is to walk through the neighborhood and look at the trees and the flowers, the landscaping that people have done in their yards, to just breathe in the life and the activity around me. And it's a way that you listen to things. Like I said, I've been inspired by a pop song on the radio that probably is just, created on the most shallow artistic level. Now, I'm sorry to bring judgment into it, but just about the eternal true love story, and just set it to a catchy 4/4 beat and churn it out, and it's no different than 100 other songs that have been written before. But when I hear it at the right moment, with the right mindset, it still is an eternal theme, and it still can move you and make you want to dance. It can still do amazing things.
What song is it?
I don't have a name that I can drop for you right now, but it's happened more than once. But just a stray song that I happen to overhear will bring me the message that I want to hear at that moment, or that will inspire me something that I want to write, something that I want to say. But I'd say what refills my battery, what keeps water in my well, is learning to sit and not do anything. Because that restores a balance that gets lost when you're doing something all the time. If you're always busy, always engaged, even doing something that you love, you don't have any time to come back to center. You are pulled this way and that way by all of the different events and the circumstances and the activities that go on in your life. So what I find is that I have to make time to sit and be still and just listen and do nothing. Because then I come back to myself, the real me, the I of I of I of I. Because that is the well. That is the well. That is the inspiration. Just coming back to your authentic self, simple, here, now, in this moment. Being completely relaxed. Being open to what spontaneously arises. That is how I create, how I write. I go into that place and just listen and see what wants to happen. I don't know, surely some of you can relate to the idea that Ben, the personality, the ego, is not always the one doing the creating, if ever. Sometimes I write a song and it's like that song has always been there. I just heard that song out on the ethers somewhere. It's just those chords wanted to be strung along that way. That melody just seemed to happen on its own. Those words just seemed to fit like it should be. And so in that creating, we're connecting with something eternal, a dimension that is outside of clock time, a dimension outside of this one, of space and time. It's the dimension where everything is one, connected now. So that a piece of art, a song, a passage that was written by Shakespeare 500 years ago can come to me now in a different place, a different time, a different culture, hardly the same language, and it can still touch me in the deepest place. So personal. So that's what I mean by art opens us up to a new dimension, the spiritual dimension. And there's just as much depth and as much texture there as we take for granted here.
And, I was going to follow on with what you're saying. I found one of the greatest, and you as a photographer, there's one other photographer in here, is watching the people look at your art, your clay, whatever you do, your poem you see, or someone come and reflect your painting. You see, and that shows us the oneness, because that feeds you the creativity, like performing a children's story for an old man, and he sees reflection back his childhood. Or seeing someone stimulate and read your painting, and it's a wild, abstract painting, and they go, what is it? And you say, tell me what you see. For in that creativity, don't you think that also adds to that and shows us the whole thing that you just presented, and also shows us that oneness of how everything is interconnected, like a song that you write, perform, and then you see bright lights. I don't really like working in it, but if you can see into the audience, or you can see the story sung in people's eyes, to me that is also part of that oneness of the spiral that inspires us, but also don't you think it feeds that oneness of the wholeness of showing how united we are?
Oh, absolutely.
I really love that. And you as you've done a lot of photography, you can catch that moment when you see that little sparkle in the eye or that smile. Because that's some of the painting of being a photographer, isn't it? Seeing those special moments with something that they see reflected with something. Even in a rose, that has a way of telling a story in it too.
Because that oneness that you're referring to is an experience. It's not an idea. It's not something to be understood. It's an experience to be had, and that's why art is so key in the spiritual path. Is because art is experiential. It's a process that has an end result that then it takes on its own life, and it's a new experience every single person that comes to it. So it's the eternal dimension is an experiential dimension that has no past and no future, and so there's no way to think about it or talk about it. You just go there.
I want to express in the meditation part how I've just recently, over the last 3 years, decided in my work I wanted, as a photographer, is to go out without any expectations. I walk the street, see what you see, feel what you feel, and then you can see through your own heart. And the other thing I've just done within the last 2 weeks, I've been doing, I exercise in the morning, walk in the neighborhood, and there's excitement, dogs and kids getting ready for school, whatever happens. But I've been walking at 11 to 11:30 at night in the neighborhood. Totally opens your eyes for every little thing that you see, every sound, every owl, every little door that cracks, everything totally, as a meditation, totally changes the way you see your own environment that you've been in 20 years. You walk, you just open your eyes. That's all it takes. And it's a meditation to do it. But you start to see different.
It is. If any of you are familiar with Dan Millman's teachings, The Peaceful Warrior, was a book that he wrote about his path. And one of the quotes that really moved me from that book, from that movie, is that there are no ordinary moments. Walking the artist's path, you learn that a street that you've walked down 700 times before can still show you something new today on the 701st time. And you can see something that you never noticed before. Or you can see something in a new way. And it's in that moment that, aha, before words kick in, before thinking begins, that you have expanded a little bit. You have seen something from a new perspective. You've tasted a little bit more of what life has to offer than you ever have before. And it's a meditation, it's an attitude, it's a way of life that you're never done with. There is no end. It's just walking it.
That reminded me of a quote I heard once. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes that said, "A mind expanded can never regain its original state."
That's it. That's it. No matter how hard you try.
I wanted to ask you, I really related to what you were saying about that so it's almost like you're receiving things at times and, you know, being open to what wants to be created. And I was just curious how you said that Ben isn't always the one in charge, you know, as you're creating. How do you work with when ego does show up, if it shows up for you, or wanting to control the process at all? Like, how do you work with that? Or maybe it doesn't show up for you.
No, it does, most definitely. I'd be surprised if there's anyone that doesn't know that demon. When the ego, the me-centered personality shows up and wants to, you know, muddle with the creative process as it goes along, and you start to wonder, oh well, what are people going to think about this? And how are they going to see me after this? And the endless considerations. And how do I deal with that? I just sit and let that be. I just sit in that space when it shows up, as it does. And if there's any getting through it, sometimes that involves writing things that I go back and look at and I say, no one's ever going to read that. And I throw it out. And it's just something that I wrote because I had to write through that particular spell that I was in at the moment. But I know when I am not in that place because of how I feel, and particularly, as I mentioned before, that kind of electric, tingling, you know, nerves coming alive kind of a feeling that you get when you're really inspired and you know that this is bigger than me and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I just search for that. When I'm not in that place, I write anyway and just do what I can do at that moment because, like I said, it's a process and a product. And I think that the ego coming in and stepping in and getting involved is just one of the phases of that process. And that is, again, why art is such a fantastic spiritual path, because it's almost perfect in the way that it gets you to look at your own ego and what it is that, where you're coming from. Why am I doing this? What am I hoping to get out of it? Am I really doing this from as selfless a place as I can manage? Or am I wanting attention?
Any more questions?
I got one real quick. How much do you write on average per day?
A lot more lately than ever before. since I quit working at the warehouse, I now am writing at least a page a day, about a 500-word article. Right now I'm doing freelance work, which is basically someone wants an article done about this, or maybe they want me to just write an article about anything and they just want to publish it. So I'm working on a per article basis. Whatever irons I have in the fire, whatever deadline is coming up next, that's what I work on, that's what I write. And I try to make it as fresh and authentic and as me as I can. But it's these days it's about a page, maybe 2 or 3 pages a day, which is about 500 to 1,500 words. And before, when I was working, not even that. No way. I didn't average a page a day. I would maybe sit down and churn out a couple of pages on a Saturday or something like that. But that was what led to my decision to walk away from that, is the demand on on my time and how precious each moment of life is, and what do I really want to spend life doing.
Okay. On the ego, you just finished a piece. Ego got in the way and said, "This is trash. No one's going to read this." Years ago, it was on paper. Are you writing on paper, or are you doing it on a computer? Just a question.
Mostly computer.
Okay. If it were paper, would you throw that away, or would the new self all of a sudden, 5 years, a year, a week later, say, "I love this piece"? Because ego got in the way and said this. So do you throw your pieces away, you say trash?
And could you repeat the question for the...
I will, yeah. Sometimes, Paul's asking, you could be judging a piece that you just wrote from the place of ego and think it's trash, when maybe it has real value. So is it ever wise to throw away something you've created? It's a very good point. I have thrown things away. And there are some things that I wrote 3 years ago that are still just sitting around in a file that haven't ever been published anywhere, because I really like a line in there, or some idea that I was trying to express, and maybe that's going to need to come out in another project some other day. So I have a lot of things that have been written that are now just hanging around. And especially if you go back before I had my own laptop, I have spiral notebooks full of poems that no one else has ever read, and things like that. And of course I keep those.
The ego kept them, correct?
Well, I imagine that ego did make that decision to keep them for future use, for future use.
Can't let that go. That's the hardest thing in the world for me, to let that, even that trash photograph or that idea, let it go. It's hard to let go.
I would say there's probably been some things that I've thrown away from a place of ego too, that maybe should have been kept. But one of the key things is the inspiration is now. And an idea that you had 5 years ago, if it has real value, it will come to you again. You'll have it now. Anything that's worth saying, anything that's worth doing, anything that's worth creating is knocking at your door right now. So if you're spending all your time reviewing your old photographs or your old music or your old writings, don't neglect what is wanting to come through fresh and now. And in fact, as close as you can stay to just a spontaneous putting it out there as it comes is probably your ideal place. But I'm a real editor and a real perfectionist about things, and I will go back and revise. And I try to stay true to the feeling and the spirit in which it first came through. But I do a lot of addition editing.
Don't you think that ego is that doesn't pick up a pencil and start drawing, or start singing, or drumming? It's the ego that we don't feel worthy enough to be. We look at a professional singer that's won all these Grammys. It's as simple as stepping aside the ego. As you were talking about creativity, I saw children playing. And the more we become like children, it's that's creativity, is not worrying about who or what. We step outside that ego, and again we go back to the simplicity of children. One of the famous verses in the Bible talks about becoming childlike. I think that's the story of art, don't you, is becoming childlike.
Absolutely, and being playful with your artistic process.
Yeah.
Ego, will come up with 1,000 other things you ought to be doing, or 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't.
Yeah, shouldn't.
It wants you to be practical. It wants you to work on the to-do list, or maybe it just wants you to go to sleep, shut down, turn on the TV, or take a nap. But inspiration will typically keep you up, burning the candle at both ends until 2 in the morning, and it wants to be done right now. No excuses.
Let's give Ben another hand. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.